Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill from Representative McClain authorizes sanctions against CCP Central Committee members who are responsible for aggression against Taiwan, the oppression of Hong Kong, and human rights abuses against the Uyghurs in China. This bill addresses gaps in our current sanctions regime by drawing attention to the critical role played by decision makers in the CCP's Central Committee. The bill also creates a sanctions authority tied directly to aggressive conduct by the PRC towards Taiwan. With the new authority in this bill, we can ensure that the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party are held personally accountable for the malign activities they direct and design. By ensuring CCP decision makers are held personally accountable, this bill will help deter political oppression and human rights abuses by the CCP. This legislation is a common sense step to encourage the CCP to choose responsible action and respect for human rights over malign activities and political oppression. The ANS incorporates technical fixes to ensure that the sanctions called for by the underlying bill can be implemented without unintended consequences. The amendment, in a nature of substitute, expressly ties the sanctions to the conduct we want to deter, thereby preserving the sanctions' deterrent effect while ensuring that they can be safely implemented and are secure against any legal challenge. The ANS preserves the bill's powerful deterrent message to any CCP officials who want to trample human rights, oppress political freedom in Hong Kong, or engage in aggression against Taiwan. Do not do it, or there will be serious consequences. It is unfortunate that I understand the ranking member is not inclined to support this bill. I would urge him and all members on both sides of the aisle to reconsider in light of the changes made by this ANS, which should resolve any technical or legal concerns that any member may have. I support this important legislation offered by the gentlewoman from Michigan, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. I yield.
Gentleman yields. Any member seek recognition? Mr. Meeks is recognized.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do oppose this bill. This bill appears to be a tough on China by sanctioning all of the PRC's top leadership, including the president, premier, and senior ministers. But this unilateral escalation would cause an unprecedented fissure in U.S.-China relations, raising the tensions to a level that we haven't seen since establishing diplomatic ties with the PRC. By passing this bill, we would hinder our ability to pressure Beijing to change course on its policies. While there is tremendous bipartisan agreement that the People's Republic of China is a grave geopolitical threat, this bill makes clear that there are very different perspectives on how to address that challenge. Instead of thinking about effective ways to outcompete Beijing and counter its worst impulses, we are seeing policy proposals that would be ineffective, counterproductive, and actually harmful to America. The bill before the committee imposes sweeping mandatory sanctions across the top tier of China's leadership without any thought to how this might impact U.S. officials and businesses who may need to engage PRC officials to advance the United States' interests. It includes no workable waiver to ensure that sanctions don't harm U.S. national security or interests. By sanctioning all top leaders in one fell swoop, it would rupture the United States-China relationship while failing to deter China and its malign behavior. You see, poking China in the eye in ways that only raise tensions in the region isn't a strategy. Preventing American officials, diplomats, and military leaders from having open lines of communication with their counterparts isn't a strategy. Thankfully, the Biden administration does have a strategy. It has implemented unprecedented policies to prevent U.S. critical technology from being exported to China. It has invested time and effort to build a coalition of partners and allies to counter China's aggression and coercion. And with Congress's support, it has invested in America's research and innovation capacity in critical industries through the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act so that we can outcompete China economically and create jobs for the future here in the United States of America. An essential component of this strategy, however, is deterrence and diplomacy to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. The bill in front of us today will upend that strategy, making it incredibly difficult to engage China on anything to advance our interests, whether it is fentanyl, regional security, Taiwan, human rights, or IP theft. So I must oppose this measure and ask my members of this committee to do the same. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Is there any discussion on the bill? There being no further discussion of the bill, the committee will move to consideration of amendments. Does any member wish to offer an amendment? Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk, and I ask for its consideration at this time. The clerk shall distribute the Barr amendment in the nature of a substitute number 85. Okay, the clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3334, offered by Mr. Barr of Kentucky. Strike all after the enacting
Without
clause.
objection, further reading of the amendment is dispensed with. I recognize myself for 5 minutes on the amendment. Let me just say that the amendment that the amendment in the nature of substitute that we presented, as I said in my opening comments, provide some technical fixes to ensure that the sanctions called for by this legislation can be implemented without unintended consequences. And I appreciate my friend, the ranking member's comments, and he's always thoughtful about these things, about what is the right strategy to deter the Chinese Communist Party. And I think in his comments opposing Congresswoman McClain's legislation, and I'm summarizing, but my friend basically made the argument that it's too provocative, that it pokes the CCP in the eye, that it would risk deteriorating relations or heightened tensions between the United States and China. That ship has sailed, with all respect. Tensions are high, and they're high not because of the United States. They're high because of the provocative actions of the Chinese Communist Party and the Central Committee members that this bill targets. And one thing that the ranking member said in opposition to the legislation was that we need a strategy. We just don't need to be raising tensions unnecessarily. Well, what I would consider the absence of a strategy is chasing diplomacy from a position of weakness and not actually deterring China. And the problem that I have with this administration's lack of strategy is the idea that we have to make upfront concessions with the expectation or hope that we will get some kind of reciprocity on the back end. That's not what we've seen. And so when we do negotiate with the Chinese Communist Party, when we do engage the Chinese Communist Party, they don't believe that we're serious. They don't believe that we're going to do anything to counter their aggression and their human rights violations and their provocations across the Taiwan Strait. Negotiations are effective only when you negotiate from a position of strength. And what I think the gentlewoman's legislation does in this case, by actually demonstrating resolve and sanctioning bad behavior when it happens, is to put the United States in a position of strength when we do go to the negotiating table. We cannot chase diplomacy, we cannot chase concessions with the hope that the Chinese Communist Party will change its behavior unless we show them we mean business. And Congresswoman McClain's bill does that. There is a strategy associated with this legislation. The strategy is to give us the leverage that we need to actually achieve the diplomatic objectives that we want. We all want peace. We don't want to raise tensions unnecessarily. But in order to achieve peace, we need deterrence. And deterrence requires strength. And Representative McClain's legislation, I think, represents that strength. That's why I support the underlying legislation and the amendment in the nature of a substitute. If we cannot sanction gross human rights violations, if we cannot sanction CCP officials who are manifestly demonstrating an aggressive posture towards Taiwan, then we're not prepared to deter Chinese Communist Party aggression. I urge my colleagues to favorably consider this legislation.
Gentlemen, yield for a second.
I will. I will yield to my
Thank
friend.
you for your comments. I just have one question. If we can't talk to anybody, how are we going to be at the table to talk about diplomacy?
Reclaiming my time, it's a good question. I think you're right. I think this bill, though, doesn't prevent the United States from engaging in diplomacy. It does restrict, with the sanctions that are applied in the bill, it does restrict CCP officials from engaging in certain, or having access to certain privileges. This bill would not disallow Secretary Blinken from communicating with the CCP officials. That's not what it would do. But it would say that we're not going to stand idly by when you violate the rules of international law, when you do not respect the territorial integrity of the democracy of Taiwan, when you engage in provocative, aggressive military exercises in violation of the airspace of Taiwan, when you saber rattle with respect to Taiwan, when you engage in gross human rights violations, whether it's the Uyghurs or Hong Kong, there should be consequences to that. And when we show CCP officials that there are consequences with sanctions, then we're negotiating from a position of strength. We actually help the Biden administration's diplomats, including Secretary Blinken, in that scenario, in my view. I yield back. Do any other members seek recognition? There being no further discussion, do any members wish to offer an amendment to the Barr amendment in the nature of a substitute? The ranking members, the ranking members recognized?
Yeah. Thank you. I just want to say, and well, just take me a few seconds. Gentlemen, and I respect Mr. Barr and very much, good friend, ideas, both here and in financial services. Strength. I think the strength that we in the Biden administration has shown is, for the first time, South Korea and Japan are talking to one another. We see the Quad coming together. We see nations in the Indo-Pacific coming together under the leadership, and we come to the table as one. That's strength. You know, you can't lead if there's nobody following you. So just bringing people together is strength. Bringing it to people to strength. And when I look at this bill and it calls for visa sanctions, that would prevent anybody from traveling to America so that we can have these conversations. If we sanction the defense minister, then we couldn't have any mill-to-mill dialogue and conversation. That is not the way of diplomacy. That, to me, does not mean or show strength. And that's why I said all we're doing is poking China in the eye in ways that only raise tensions in the region, and that is not a strategy. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. There being no further discussion, do any members have an additional amendment, or there being no further amendments or discussion on the bill, the question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of substitute number 85, offered by myself. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. There being no further amendments, I move that the committee report H.R. 3334 as amended to the House with favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Roll call.
A roll call vote has been requested pursuant to the chair's previous announcement. This vote will be postponed. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 5245, the Science Technology Agreement Enhanced Congressional Notification Act of 2023. The bill was circulated in advance. The clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 5245, to amend the State Department Basic Authorities Act of 1956 to require certain congressional notification prior to entering into, renewing, or extending a science and technology agreement with the People's Republic of China and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, the Barr Amendment in the nature of a substitute number 80 circulated to members in advance shall be considered as read and will be treated as original text for purposes of amendment. I recognize myself in support of my legislation. H.R. 5245 is entitled the Science and Technology Agreement Enhanced Congressional Notification Act of 2023. This bill is a bipartisan effort aimed at enhancing transparency and accountability in the U.S.-China relations by imposing congressional oversight on science and technology partnerships between our two nations. This bill reinstates a reporting requirement from the 2003 NDAA that was repealed in 2016, mandating the Secretary of State to detail the benefits of any science and technology agreements with the People's Republic of China. Beyond reporting, this bill introduces an enhanced notification to Congress before any science and technology agreements with China are implemented. Currently, Congress lacks oversight over the administration's agreements with China, as exemplified by the recent extension of the Science Technology Agreement with the CCP without disclosure of its details. Let me be clear, this bill prioritizes our national security, human rights, and technological leadership. It aims to safeguard American innovation and conduct thorough risk assessments to prevent illicit technology or intellectual property transfers that could benefit the People's Liberation Army, while also safeguarding the safety of American researchers in China. Additionally, we seek to broaden oversight by requiring reporting not only on science and technology agreements, but also on implementing arrangements with PRC entities that could enhance the CCP's scientific and military capabilities. The last time Congress legislated oversight on STAs was 2003. But China is not the same country as it was 20 years ago. Under President Xi, China's ambition to become a science and technology superpower is closely intertwined with its military modernization efforts. This civil-military fusion is a real threat to national security. To prevent the CCP from leveraging our expertise for military purposes, it is essential that any science and technology agreements are rigorously vetted to ensure they do not contribute to strengthening Chinese military-industrial complex. As U.S. Ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns recently emphasized on 60 Minutes, the PRC continues to systematically steal intellectual property from American companies operating in China. Academic espionage by China is significant and real. Estimates suggest that the annual theft of U.S. intellectual property and trade secrets ranges from $225 billion to $600 billion, with a significant portion attributed to the CCP. It is past time Congress exert its powers of oversight to ensure that U.S. joint research with the PRC remains beneficial for U.S. interests and in the interest of peace, and not in the interest of CCP's military superiority objectives. Thank you for marking up H.R. 5245, and I yield back. Is there any discussion on the bill? The ranking member is recognized.
Thank you, and I support this measure by Representative Barr and Dina Titus, and my thanks to Mr. Barr and Chairman McCall for working with me to get this bill into a bipartisan place so that we can have robust oversight over any U.S.-China governmental science cooperation. We all know the challenges posed by the People's Republic of China. We will be discussing the economic and technological aspects of our competition at a hearing in this very room tomorrow. But China isn't going anywhere, and the American people do not want conflict. They want a stable and constructive competition with China. This is why we must continue to engage China and find areas of cooperation, even as we vigorously contest, compete, and when necessary, confront Beijing. As the first bilateral agreement of our nation signed after we recognized the PRC, the United States-China Science and Technology Agreement, or STA, is critical to our interests. The engagement has facilitated research projects in areas of shared interest, resulting in benefits for the United States, China, and the rest of the world. As long as it's done with proper safeguards and monitoring, science cooperation can be beneficial to the United States. And this is why it's critical that we have a robust U.S.-China STA. The United States has nearly 60 STAs with nations around the world. And while government-to-government cooperation can take place without them, these agreements provide a set of bilateral accepted standards, rules, and protections that guide the research and provide access and protections to American researchers. In other words, an STA is a critical mechanism to ensure that any government-to-government science cooperation is done safely and is in our national interests. Mr. Barr's bill would allow Congress to conduct a robust oversight over the U.S.-China STA through a notification that outlines how the agreement benefits the United States and how it can further bolster to protect U.S. interests. It will also enable Congress to monitor all the joint activities and cooperative projects that are taking place under the agreement to ensure that we are not indirectly assisting Beijing in ways that may undermine the United States' values or interests. And with that, I yield back. I support the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any additional discussion on the bill? There being no further discussion of the bill, oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
Thank you.
the gentlelady and the co-sponsor of the bill, I want to thank the gentlelady, Congresswoman Titus, for her bipartisan work with this, and I recognize her for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Barr, and it's a pleasure to work with you on this. But I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute that I would ask the committee to consider. Not yet?
The clerk shall distribute the amendment. Oh, sorry. Okay, I think it is. I think we've already done the amendment. Okay. Sorry.
I'm back. I
Gentlelady's
apologize.
recognized.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. The amendment in the nature of a substitute has already been offered.
right.
And now I'm speaking in favor of that amendment. Okay, thank you, and I apologize. The bipartisan A&S being offered makes improvements to the underlying text, and I'm glad to be the Democrat lead on this measure and to partner with my Republican colleague on it. The State Department facilitates government-to-government science collaboration by providing ground rules and standards on issues such as the protection of intellectual property. There are nearly 60 bilateral science and technology agreements and more than 2,000 sub-agreements currently in force. The engagements facilitated by these agreements provide valuable access for U.S.-based scientists to get to foreign scientific capabilities, facilities, and expertise, while also informing allies about why the U.S. is the technological and scientific leader in the world. We share our norms, our procedures, and our values. Scientific cooperation has the potential to benefit the U.S. and the world by positively contributing to public health, addressing climate change, and supporting innovation. The U.S.-China Science and Technology Agreement became the first bilateral deal signed after the U.S. formally recognized the PRC in 1979. Since then, the agreement has been renewed every 5 years, the last time, though, being in 2018. It paused for a while, was renewed for 6 months, renewed for another 6 months. This would put it in place back to the 5-year standard. So currently, the administration is in active negotiations to amend and renew the agreement like originally intended. This ANS endorses scientific cooperation with China when it's in the interest of the United States. It also mandates that the State Department submit to Congress a notification before a renewal or extension of a science and technology agreement with China. That's a good thing because it enhances the role that Congress can play in oversight. Similarly, for any existing agreement, state must submit a notification within 90 days outlining the terms of the agreement and how it bolsters national security for Congress to take into account. It's important to note that this bill takes a clear-eyed approach to these agreements due to the sensitivity of technological exchanges. The congressional notifications that are mandated here emphasize the national security implications of the agreement, push the administration to safeguard our U.S. intellectual property, and ensure state is able to monitor and evaluate the implementation of the agreement. I think it's a smart bill because it's tough on China while ensuring the continuation of constructive diplomacy. It puts conflict and competition aside, but puts U.S. interests first, and that's good for us as well as for the rest of the world. So I thank my colleague for allowing me to join him in this effort. I apologize for getting there a little mixed up with the procedure, and I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan measure. Now yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and I associate myself with the gentlelady from Nevada's comments and agree wholeheartedly with everything she said. Is there any further discussion? There being no further discussion of the bill, the committee will move to consideration of amendments. Does any member wish to offer an amendment?